Unilateralism, there's a lot of speculation, a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of nonsense is said and time is wasted. I keep saying to myself and to my friends and those who interact with me, you really need to read only 2 documents. And now, since about 6 weeks, another document. And these are the Project for the New American Century, the PNAC, and what the present administration in Washington did with that document, and that is the National Security Policy of 2002. And then the most worrying recent addition to that is what General Pace, the Chief of Staff of the US military, said to the US Congress just a little while ago. I think it's 6 weeks ago. He submitted the 4th quarterly review to the US Congress, in which he defines that the US and we all must expect what he calls a long war, an involvement in multiple theaters at the same time of the US Army in order to maintain the supremacy, economic, political, cultural, socially, and of course militarily. This is a most recent document. Have a look at it. So this road of unilateralism on which the US decided to travel, the US government, I must be very fair, because there are so many good groups, strong groups, groups around Kathy Kelly, for example, Voices in the Wilderness, and many, many, many others, that it is unfair to say US. We have to say US government, US authorities, whatever. They have shown many signs of independence, of colloquial going it alone. They have not signed on the International Court of Justice, as you know. They have not ratified the Landmine Convention, which Canada supported and promoted. They have not signed on the Kyoto Protocol, as you know. But you may not know that out of 191 countries, 189 have signed the Convention on the Rights of the Child, except 2. 2 countries, one with a government, the other doesn't have a government. The one that doesn't have a government is Somalia, and the one that has a government is the United States. These 2 have not signed such an innocent convention as the rights of the child. That is amazing, but it shows the loneliness with which political decision-making is proceeding in the US. And then, of course, there is the dramatic case that we see, unfortunately, every day. Try to remember when you had a day when you looked at a newspaper in Canada, if it wasn't page 1, it was page 2 or 3, or listened to the news, there wasn't something about Iraq. And that brings me to that difficult question, and that is, what about the United Nations here? What did the UN do? And we have to acknowledge that there are immense structural weaknesses that confront the UN, that explain why the UN was not more successful in influencing the Iraq drama. There's much to be said about this. I want to single out just one item here, and that is the freedom with which this United Nations Charter can be interpreted. There are many terms on which, if we were to sit down and write a definition of them, and they are not defined in this document, where we would have different interpretations, different definitions. And then linked to that is, in order to get in the present UN political system, particularly the UN Security Council, anything out, any resolution passed, you must follow the consensus approach, which means you lower yourself to the lowest common denominator, and that usually is imprecise language. And it has taken many, many years. Only last year did the Secretary General, in connection with the need for UN reform, refer to the need to do away with this consensus approach. And he said, consensus promotes generalizations and prevents serious efforts to act. I think that is a very big step forward, because once you verbalize something that is of concern to you, then you have taken a position. He has taken a position, and many people have agreed with him. If that would be taken seriously, things like Iraq must have completed all actions in one resolution. Iraq must fully cooperate. If Iraq does this and that, that constitutes a breach of agreement. And if there is a breach of agreement, there will be serious consequences. Now, 4 items: completed all actions, fully cooperated, breach of agreement, serious consequence. We all have different views on that. And that was the pretext for, in the end, justifying going to war, because the US and the UK said there's a breach of agreement and the serious consequences are what we define as serious consequences. And the truth, of course, is that the UN never mandated this going to war in March 2003. But it revealed yet again that the United Nations has been unable in having a decisive voice in international conflicts. What have you read about the United Nations and North Korea, I ask you? What have you read about the United Nations and Palestine? What have you read about the United Nations right now and Iraq? What have you read about the United Nations and Iran? Not much. What have you read about international trade and fair trade practices and the United Nations? The World Trade Organization is not a UN body. And there's a very dangerous tendency, watch out for that, to create a parallel United Nations now, outside of the United Nations. The same, for example, with regard to trade. There was a trade body, UNCTAD. The conference on trade in Geneva was dealing with trade issues. That was very much defending fair trade practices, and therefore it became an instrument that was considered as useless as far as the big powers were concerned. So you created the World Trade Organization that is not a UN body. The US is vehemently opposed to the Kyoto Protocol. So they met with Japan and a few other countries to discuss another way of handling pollution, air pollution. So we have, UNAIDS is another example. 10, 15 years ago, 15 years, closer to 15 years, I don't remember now the exact year, a body was created, UNAIDS. UNAIDS was supposed to deal with this terrific problem. And WHO, the health organization, UNICEF, UNDP joined together in order to create a joint effort in the fight against HIV/AIDS. What happened? Suddenly a body with much greater finance was created called the Global Fund, outside the purview of the United Nations, in order to pull away the authority from this UNAIDS that was trying its best to mobilize resources and implement programs. So we see that tendency of creating a parallel body that is more under the traditional thumb of some powers, particularly the US. Well, I think this points, if nothing else, it points to the urgency of UN reforms. Now, to me, Iraq is a fabulous example of what can go wrong in a body that hasn't changed since 1945, when 52 member countries existed, and today when 191 members are in the United Nations.